Welcome, fellow wine lovers. This is the Wine Ghost podcast. I'm Máté Vas, certified sommelier and seeker of hidden stories behind the most mysterious drink in history. If you have any questions about the topics we mentioned during the shows, please look for the Wine Ghosts on Instagram, where you can send your questions and responses via direct messages or just leave a comment under the episode's post. You can also find easy ways to get in contact with our guests and follow their stories. But now, please grab a glass, get comfortable, and listen how today's ghosts get out of the bottle. So this is the third episode in the Balaton Upland series, this time from the Gilvesy Winery St. George Mountain. The founder, Róbert Gilvesy, hosted me in their historic winery, sitting elegantly in the best spot of the northern hillside. Róbert is a citizen of the world. He grew up in Canada, moved to Hungary, and turned his love for the land into establishing his own wine label. Just to mention some highlights: volcanic Rhine Riesling and Sauvignon Blanc, bone-dry flinty Furmint, spontaneous fermentation, and organic winemaking. But the most exciting project is maybe the Terra Boxed, which includes 2 Rhine Rieslings cultivated on 2 different terroirs on the Balaton Uplands, but harvested at the same time and made with the same winemaking techniques. It's a tasty representation of what this land can give to the world. Róbert talks about the history of winemaking in the region and how this generation might bring back the fame it once had. Okay, so thank you, Róbert, for the welcoming, and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Máté, for coming. Maybe even if we have a chance, we're inside now, but we had a group of people yesterday, even in January. It was beautiful sunshine on the terrace and this beautiful view. Maybe you can see it too.
Thank you. So I would like to begin with your roots, maybe, or why did you choose this terroir to establish your winery, and where do you come from, and where does the motivation come from?
That's a often asked question of me. I'm Canadian and I'm Hungarian, so both even legally from and nationally. I've lived in Hungary for 27 years, but I was born in Hungary, and I came here when I was 30 years old, so I'm almost equal time in both countries. But I grew up on a farm in Canada, so my grandparents came from Hungary, all of them, and they started to grow tobacco in Canada.
Okay.
And so I grew up on a tobacco farm, growing tobacco, because at that time tobacco was very popular, and there was an industry that was useful, and I grew up understanding how to grow tobacco and the beautiful notes of aromas actually from tobacco. When you dry tobacco in the kiln, in the morning you open up the kiln and you get these beautiful aromas. So this is the beautiful part for me. Otherwise tobacco farming is quite difficult, at least as difficult as the grapes. And then when I came to Hungary, after studying architecture and business, I decided to explore a region that my colleague had introduced to me, a colleague from architecture, and she introduced me to the region of the Kali Basin, the Hegymagas in Hungarian, and then she also showed me this place called St. George Hegy, or Mount St. George, as we call it, and this beautiful cellar, which was a Esterházy property at one time, built in the 17th century, and it was a ruin, but I could tell that the beautiful terroir and beautiful positioning of the cellar was very special in not even just in Hungary, but in a global sense, because I had traveled enough to know that this was very special. And over the years, my love for wine started when I was a teenager, and my father fortunately loved French wines and introduced me to some very nice French wines when I was in my early 20s. And I understood the difference between bottom shelf and top shelf wines.
Mhm.
And this inspired me through my many years of working and traveling to taste and experience excellent wines. And so when I had this opportunity, and I saw this terroir, and I tasted the wines of this terroir, I knew that there was a great history and great depth to this terroir.
Do you still remember your first wine from this region?
The actual first wine I don't remember, because we came very informally with some friends of mine to the Balaton many times. And in those days, you didn't drink too many wines from bottles, as you probably will remember.
When was it?
It would have been in the 1993, 94, and then of course there was a lot of foilbor, as you say, you know, a lot of wine from the carafe, I say, and so you're drinking a lot of fresh wines. And there you could always taste this beautiful minerality and freshness of the acidity, and this was typical of this volcanic region, and I could very much identify with it. And then as the opportunity presented itself through my work and many years of traveling back and forth from Budapest to the Balaton, I bought this place in 1994 on the hillside. So in fact, before it was a ruin, and at that time I still came here camping. So it was a ruin, and I camped in the ruin.
Okay.
And so we didn't have water, and so I would go to the local spring here and bring water, and we'd camp here and have parties here and have barbecues here, and it was and it's become part of my life and for my children's life too, to know this area. So it became essential. So, you know, like essential to have water, you need essential to be here. And I bought my first vineyards on the south side, which is the Torani, which is one of my wines now, the Torani vineyards, in I believe it was 2007, I think I bought that vineyard. And at that time, I got involved with a local winery called the Kali-Kuvek, which is in the Kali Basin. And there we harvested the grapes and used those grapes with another cellar called the Kali-Kuvek and made a nice Riesling. And subsequently, I renovated this cellar starting in 2009, finishing in 2012, and had our first vintage in 2012 with our Riesling and a Sauvignon Blanc, which are the two first vintages.
And where did you learn winemaking, or how was the transition?
My winemaking experience came from a consultant from Austria, and I would travel to Austria very many times and study with him, work with him, worked in the vineyards as in other cellars where he was a consultant, and then subsequently I hired a Hungarian young winemaker called Balaton Upland, and he has been with me since then. And since then we developed our wines and our philosophy towards the wines, and so the learning of the wine trade has been gradual, even from the Kali-Kuvek. So the first harvest I did were in 2007, 2008 with the Kali-Kuvek and onward, and then we started together with Balaton in 2012 at our own cellar.
And what did you maybe learn in Austria about cultivating and about the wine trade?
Well, what I learned Austria, I mean, at the time and today even still is very, very, very professional. And I think that what I learned from them is that precision is important, but not to forget at the same time the nature. But to be able to provide wines on a regular basis that are enjoyable and expressive, then I think that you need to have some skill set that is important. I mean, I think still that most important is what we get from our terroir. That's much more important than probably a high science approach to wine. Much, much, much more important is that we have excellent fruit, and excellent fruit from our terroir, and we bring it in such a way that basically, as a winemaker, you need to do less with it than more. And I think we've been successful over the years to become more and more aware of this, even though much of the industry focuses on technicalities and how to be precise and treat wines and things. I think it's much more important to be much more natural. We have since then become organic producers of grapes, and our wines are going to be organic certified from 19, the vintage. Not that that's the most important thing to have a certification on your label, but it's an attitude. It's an attitude towards the way we treat the soil, the way we treat our vineyards, the longevity of these vineyards, the fruit that we get into the cellar, because without good fruit, you don't have good wine. So that's the bottom line. And we want to express the nature of Saint George, or Mount Saint George, which is this volcanism, this minerality, this saltiness that we have. I think there is something special about it. The feeling of the acidities of these wines are special.
So can you, if you already mentioned the terroir, can you maybe shortly introduce where we are and where your different parcels are, and what are the particular differences between these parcels, because you have single vineyard selected sites as well and wines. So what's the idea and the philosophy behind it?
We have over the years decided to produce basically 6 bottlings. Our major bottling is a wine called Bohème, which is a cuvée not just of Saint George Hedge, because my colleague has 7 hectares on Tokaj. Tokaj is 23 kilometers back towards Budapest, and that is a totally limestone vineyards, and from there he's concentrating on Riesling or Riesling, as well as Cake Francois. And what we do is, between the 2 terroirs, we do a beautiful cuvée of these 2 terroirs. The characters of the wines, the acidities of the wines are much different, but together they kind of really, as they say in Hungarian, muzsika. They make nice music together. And we have a cuvée of Welsh Riesling, Rhine Riesling, and Sauvignon Blanc. And then the rest of our wines are either estate wines from Saint George Hedge, meaning Sauvignon Blanc, which is an international varietal that came about largely because in the 1970s the cooperatives on this mountain decided they wanted to have an international varietal besides Rhine Riesling. And that was the other important decision they made. And they planted on the north side of the mountain, almost exclusively on the north side of the mountain, Sauvignon Blanc.
And why do you think it was? Because it's cooler and they wanted to...
I think it's cooler, it's well drained, the soil is a little bit lighter, and you get these beautiful, salty, fresh Sauvignon Blanc. And so we started almost by chance. I almost started by chance with the Sauvignon Blanc because my neighbor offered me some wine for an event I was taking to Budapest, some 20 liters of wine, and I tasted from his 2,000-liter barrel some wonderful Sauvignon Blanc, and I wanted to know where the area was, and he showed me, and eventually I bought the vineyard, and from there we started doing Sauvignon Blanc, and it's been very successful. So Sauvignon Blanc has become important for us, but that's part of our cuvée with the Bohème. as well as a single vineyard bottling called the Magyaros, as well as our estate bottling, which is the Gilvesy Sauvignon Blanc. And then Rhine Riesling being our biggest varietal, we have in basically every part of our vineyard. So our vineyards are south-facing, which is the Torani, and it's southeast facing, which is the Váradi, and it's Magyaros, which is on the north side, where the Sauvignon Blanc is. But Rhine Riesling actually appears in all those vineyards, and even in the Magyaros, we have about half a hectare. We have about 4 hectare in the Váradi, and we have 2 hectare in the south side. So we are widely spread with the Rhine Riesling because we believe in the volcanic nature and the properties that we can offer into the Rhine Riesling. And we have different bottlings. As I said, the Sauvignon Blanc, which is the estate, and we have also an estate Rhine Riesling. Other than that, we have our single vineyards, which are the Torani to the south. We have a Váradi Furmint, which we almost exclusively planted here on Mount St. George, because before we were here, there was almost no Furmint. And then on the north side, we have the Magyaros Sauvignon Blanc.
And nowadays, Furmint is very much associated with Tokaj, right? But before that, there was a huge planting of Furmint around Lake Balaton, as I learned before. So what was really the motivation? It was because of historic regions, or it was?
Well, so I would say that our biggest planting is Rhine Riesling. Our second biggest is basically Furmint and Oros Riesling. Okay, so the idea behind Furmint was that I was convinced that if we want to open into also foreign markets, we have to present indigenous varietals. And I also knew that before the Second World War, or actually before phylloxera more so, Furmint was planted widely in Hungary, almost everywhere in Hungary. Furmint was planted, and that it disappeared from here when after phylloxera and after the Second World War. It was largely planted with Oros Riesling. But Furmint, I think, was less planted here because it's not as easy as an Oros Riesling. Oros Riesling was largely brought here because it's a reliable producer. And it is probably, of all the grapes we grow, the easiest one to grow. But in terms of character and bringing terroir, the essence of terroir, I think that Furmint is one of the strongest translator of terroir we have. And so I've been, the first few years we had Furmint, we didn't know what to expect, put it this way. And now, as the years have gone on, I'm more and more convinced that it's one of the strongest translators of our terroir, of St. George. So, I mean, we have to talk about our region. It's a beautiful, beautiful region, and it's something we need to talk about and translate not only visually, but through our flavors, through our wines, through our food. It has to be something that we talk about because we want to make ourselves known as a special terroir, because I think it deserves the recognition.
And if you would have to maybe compare Furmint with, I know Tokaj is a big region.
Yes.
But if you would have to compare, or let's suppose we are at a blind tasting.
Yes.
And I have to identify Furmint from St. George Hill, and I would have to identify a Furmint from Tokaj. Where should I look for?
I think that Furmint, and I mean, Tokaj is amazing in any sense you can think of, and Furmint is one of the major varietals of Tokaj, And over the last, let's say, 10 to 20 years, they've been trying to create a strong, dry Furmint. One thing I think if you're in a tasting and you would look at the two regions, I think one thing you would notice is that our region, we can generally ferment dry. So we can actually go dry. So really to 1 to 2 grams of sugar and on the finished wine, whereas many cases in Tokaj, not all cases, but many cases, because of the very powerful acidity profiles in Tokaj, they're leaving some 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 grams of sugar in their wines. So you get a different feeling to the Riesling. They're very powerful. And I think we have what I think is gastronomy, or so I should say for gastronomy, cleansing of the palate, fresh on the palate, different than Tokaj.
Because in terms of soil, it's very much
different,
right?
Much different, yes.
Because
so we're basalt and tuff are two kind of volcanic stones over millions of years of erosion and microelements into our Pennine Sea base. So what do we have is a mix of volcanic stone with the remnants of the Pennine Sea. Okay, so they're mixed together, and the microelements over 9 million years make up our terroir. Whereas in andesite and rhyolite is much bigger. There's more clay, more volcanic clay in Tokaj, and that's a different terroir, also volcanic, also super beautiful. But I think that this is much less known, much less known. And interestingly enough, as Tokaj was a great export center for wines, as we know, as being Hungarians, what is less known is that Tapolca was also a great center of export. In fact, they exported, before the First World War, more wine than we do now, through Austria primarily, and through the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and through to England, and through to Trieste, and so on. There was a great export network that has disappeared, of course, through the Second World War.
And in terms of Rhine Riesling, because I don't really know too much places with volcanic soil who are producing Rhine Riesling.
That's true.
Or let's suppose we are still at this blind tasting. Where should I look for in a volcanic Rhine Riesling which would differentiate it maybe from a typical Mosel or from
Rheingau or...
Yes, like a typical Riesling.
Well, if you speak of this, and do you like to taste?
Please.
Yeah. Because we do have our 2017 here. It's interesting enough, a few years ago I was in Canada, and it's a big event called Terroir. It's about food and wine, and they had a large tasting, and we're, I think, 18 wineries in beautiful tasting hall, and most of them were Canadian, but there were two that were different. There was one from Rhine Hessen, and another one from was me, which was from Hungary. We are the only volcanic wine. Rhine Hessen is also more clay and limestone. In Canada, almost all the Rieslings are from a kind of a limestone base. And the tasting was very interesting because it was kind of like, yes, boop, boop. And because there's a different profile in terms of, more than anything, acidities. The way the acidities feel on a volcanic soil are different than on a limestone. Both have good acidity, very beautiful acidities, but the profile you feel on your palate is different. I feel in general in the volcanic soils you feel a more direct kind of, that's this kind of linear acidity, and in limestone you feel a more like a flat, like a over your palate, kind of covering your palate left to right and down through. So, and this is what I see between our Martinos and our comparison through our terroir wines. This kind of difference between this kind of this direct linear acidity, higher fruit, higher citrus on the volcanic, to a more flat acidity over the palate, and almost an oiliness when you get off of limestone.
Because you have a very interesting package, so to say, of Rieslings from the two different terroirs.
Yes.
And you already mentioned this limestone and clay, rich soil, and also this basalt rich soil. And this, would you say that this Riesling would transmit these differences?
Absolutely.
Maybe the best.
Absolutely, I think they transmit very well. I think the great noble grapes transmit very well the terroir. Hey, even Ola Riesling transmits very well, because we have in the cellar both Ola Riesling from Taidun Mountain, which is in the limestone, and St. George Head or Mount St. George. We also have Ola Riesling, and the two are absolutely different. Yeah, absolutely. And we're within 23 kilometers of each other. So what you're tasting now is the Torani 17. This is the fermentation is started in stainless steel, and then halfway through the fermentation is put into 500-liter oak barrels. Also, we use some other aging vessels to have a very neutral profile on the nose, but it's a wine that we can at 17, and we can easily keep aging this for a number of years.
And it's typical to also to the volcanic terroir that these wines are aging better or aging well.
We find that the volcanic terroir wines are aging very well. Our experience is obviously relatively short compared to many cellars, but if we see some other places that have put away wines, let's say some other wineries have been here for longer, but yes, they have a long aging potential.
Yeah. So how, if I should buy this bottle and maybe keep for my son, because I'm 27, would you recommend me this vintage and this variety?
If you have a 17, I don't think we have any 17 for sale anymore, but yes, if you buy a 17 now, I think you can easily keep it for 5 to 10 years. So I don't know much longer than this. I mean, to be honest with you, I am. Wish I could say that I'm a 10th generation, winemaker in this region, but I don't think there are any 10th generation winemakers in this region. But I would say that from my experience so far, we're still drinking 2013s, very rarely, because we don't have much left. But and those are beautiful. So I think that you can say that mark of great terroir is also the longevity of their wines.
And also you mentioned that you're gonna turn into, or you will turn into an organic vineyard, and you turned already, but you get the certification. Would you say that on volcanic terroir, the organic viticulture is easier or more difficult than maybe on another soil?
I don't think I could name it. There are different issues to deal with, but for us, the most salient, most important elements are the amount of humidity and rain we have in terms of our, as you know, if you go to South America in these high altitude areas with very little rain, they have very little need for protecting and their vines. We are in a relatively humidity rich terroir, and so if we have very wet years, there's more pressure. If there's drier years, we have less pressure.
I just tasted the Rhine Riesling also from the nose. It was what you already mentioned. It's very citrus and lime emphasized, so to say, and very much on the fruitier side, I would say, not really on the. And the acidity is also, I would say, elevated, but also comfortable. I could identify it as a volcanic terroir, because what I have always this salinity mark, or
Yes.
this which I always feel, and my mouth just kind of screams for blue cheeses, and that's the mark for
Yeah, that's
for
good.
volcanic terroir. But
I love blue cheese too.
which maybe food pairings would you recommend?
Well, you just mentioned that, and sometimes, and I don't know why, but for myself, I don't make it that often, but I do love it. Is Hungarian risotto mai.
Okay.
It's for
a
an
good idea, yeah.
everyday kitchen, and then you deglaze it with some Riesling,
Okay.
and you make a nice sauce under the it's a Maya's liver, so with onions,
Okay.
and then you deglaze it with some nice Riesling, and then you have the nice Riesling glass beside it. It's a very beautiful match.
Wow, I'm gonna
But
try.
also goat I would say in general goat cheeses are very nice with this, because goat cheese has this beautiful acidity to it too, as in soft goat cheeses particularly, but even older goat cheeses, but has this acidity which is nice and match for Rieslings.
And also it has a lighter body, but I would say the finish is very long. So maybe I tasted it 1 minute ago, but it's still
lingering.
Still lingering, and also still evolving in my mouth. So on the nose it was very fruity, but it's much more complex than just a nose. And do you live here on this mountain? Or
I live here almost exclusively from May until November, and then I split my time between Budapest and in the countryside in the wintertime.
And how should listeners imagine the life here in the summer and also in the winter, because there is a great seasonality here in the region,
Yes.
and I think tourism or wine tourism is a great call for everyone who is also a wine lover. So
Yes.
how difficult it is maybe to...
Well, we're making changes ourselves. Right now, this is our only place of put it this way, where we work. We do have other logistic properties where we do our work for our farming and some of our storage. And over time, though, we want to have places where we can accept people on a regular basis. Here right now, by appointment, we do tastings, and we have a small vinoteca. But eventually, we'll have a vinoteca and a tasting place where we'll be open regularly in summer and in winter, because it's important that we can talk to our people who are like our wine and taste with them, talk to them, and see what they're feeling about our wines. So that's been difficult because I live here a lot, and then and if I'm open all the time, then I have a very active life, very active life, and so between those two things, we're trying to balance. So it's hopefully by the summer we'll have our vinoteca open and a tasting location, and then we really like to see lots of people coming.
And you also have a very famous event in the region, Bohème Legyőt, right?
Bohème Legyőt is called in English Bohème Be There. It's a once a year event where we're in the evening in the summertime, and we can have music and food and wine, and this year for the first time we'll have some of our Furmint champagne.
Okay.
Which we haven't developed until now, but we'll be bringing out a very fresh champagne in our first Bohème of 2020, and we celebrate kind of the summer. I mean, it's a wonderful place to be above the Balaton at nighttime with the stars and the mountains around us.
And you can sit here on this grass in front of the terrace, right? Enjoying this view.
Yes, and we have music. We have on here above on the terrace we have our band. The band is playing music. We have some nice chefs who create some nice buffet menus for us, and then you can enjoy those menus. And it's a once-a-year event which lots of people come to. Yes.
And in 2020, when could listeners come?
We think it's going to be. We haven't set the date yet. We try to get it very close to the full moon, because the light from the moon acts an extra light to the whole neighborhood, put it this way. So we can see the Balaton, we can see the hills around when we have a full moon. So we almost try to almost time it with that, and we haven't set the date yet, but it'll be in July.
Beautiful. And maybe if you want to save the date later, I think you should follow the Gilvesy's Instagram, because I'm a very keen follower of the Instagram profile, and I always have the feeling that it has a lot of messages to.
We do. We post on Instagram and on Facebook and Twitter as well. So we are developing a new website. So will be more information coming on our website as well. So that will be connected to Instagram, our new website. So even if you go on our website, you'll get the feeds from Instagram as well. So yes, we want to communicate more with our people, and I hope we get some people from Germany coming, of course.
Hopefully.
And Hungary, but Germany is an important place for us. I've been to Berlin a few times and have been taking our wines abroad, and I think that's an interesting place for us.
And you already mentioned the champagne or the sparkling wine. This is method traditional.
Yes, it's a traditional method. It's Furmint, and I've tasted some of our initial degorgements, and they look very promising. So I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
This region is, or why this climate is unique, not just because of the soil, but also maybe because of the lake, right? Or how much effect does it have on your
Well, it's important to us. I think that we're called the Balaton wine region, and even though we're Saint George Head or Mount Saint George, the Balaton, you can see from here very well to the left, looking towards the Balaton, it's sitting almost in the lake. And for Balaton itself, it is much more influence than for us. Our influence is primarily the humidity that develops from the Balaton. Not so much from this aspect that they have in Balaton, where there's a lot of reflection, heat reflection off the Balaton. It's not a deep lake, so it's not like some other places where there's a huge heat sink and it's going to moderate the temperature for the whole region. Yeah, maybe for a small time, but it's not like it's going to be for weeks and weeks and weeks that the temperature will be moderated. It's the lake is maybe, I don't know, 5 or 7 meters in the middle at the most, and so it doesn't have this effect. But in terms of reflection, Balaton suffers, I would say. And in the past, you'd say they benefited because they had an issue, if you want to say, ripening their grapes. But now, with the climate change, we would say that it's more of an issue in terms of heat, too much heat, and we are back far enough. We're probably about 5 to 6 kilometers off the lake, and we do not have any reflection from the lake. What we do is have a good water base, and we have humidity from the lake. A slight tempering effect, and it's also very beautiful.
Yeah, it is. And if you could maybe answer this question, or how would you answer this question, what was always in my mind since I come here to the Balaton Uplands, because the Balaton Uplands is very typical for its white wines, white varieties. Yes. But if we look at other parts of the world, we could also see other volcanic regions which produce very distinctive and very beautiful red wines.
Yes.
And maybe the terroir or maybe the temperature is not that different.
It's a good question. I mean, why did it happen? Let's say because before phylloxera, as I know, this region was 50% red. Even in a time when probably the temperature profiles are much different. So they did have much more red in those times. After phylloxera, it was largely planted in whites, and then even more so, I think, after the Second World War, where there was central planning of vineyards and things. So I think it was highly focused on the white, and I think it's very good with white. I think, personally, and maybe people would argue with me about this, but I think white wines transmit terroir in many more colors and many more levels than maybe red wines do. You always have this aspect of the tannins in red wines and things that kind of always kind of veil covering the. Of course, you can taste the terroir, but white wines don't have this veil. They don't have this veil of tannins and things happening. They have this kind of purity to them that transmit terroir maybe a little more. Now, how that happens in the next 20 or 30 years of climate change. Saying this, I've tasted some very beautiful, and we actually made some red wines many years ago with Calais Quebec. We made in 2010. We made a Cabernet Franc, which turns out it's aged beautifully, and I only have 2 or 3 bottles left, and every year I open one, and it's wonderful. But I planted next to the cellar a couple of rows of Kadarka and a couple of rows of Cake Francos, because I'm also experimenting with the future of red wines here. And we'll see in another few years how we do. And I do believe in bringing back a balance of red wines to this region. It's absolutely warranted, and it can be very interesting, I think.
What was the reason behind planting Kadarka? So you wanted to plant an indigenous grape variety?
Yes, like I say, I would like to concentrate on indigenous types. I mean, you said you tasted a Chokosulu at Sassi, and I tasted this wine, and I thought it was very interesting. I mean, it's a totally different world than most red wines, but I love it. I love this. I think you did the 17 or the 18? 18? Yeah. I think I had the 17, and I love the 17. A little chilled, a little bit in the fridge, a little bit chilled, a little bit. It's kind of like almost like a Beaujolais. Almost.
Exactly,
It's got this kind of bubbly, fruity.
Yeah, like a good starter.
It's and then I think it's great. And problem with these varietals, of course, is that why they disappeared is that they're very sensitive and very hard to grow. So your production is very low, generally speaking. They're very sensitive to diseases, and that's why they disappeared into these more reliable varietals. But it's a shame because you get beautiful nuance from these. Kadarka is also very hard to grow. Now, so I've planted it up here near the cellar. So higher up you are, maybe a little less humidity, and maybe we can keep it away from disease easier than maybe on the lower levels, and so we can have some Kadarka that would be quite beautiful finesse wines. I believe in red wines that are finesse. I believe in red wines that are closer to white wines. With this kind of finesse and brightness that you can get from white wines. And I'm not a big fan of big, heavy red wines.
Kadarka and also Cake Francos would.
Cake Francos,
It's a beautiful choice, yeah. So what do you expect from the Cake Francos here?
Well, we have, my colleague has some, from Martinos, we have Cake Francos from Tokaj, which is limestone. And I believe that terroir is excellent for Cake Francos. I think the richness, Cake Francos is a wine that typically can be a little bit hard on the acidity side, but the limestone has this character of giving a little bit of flatness and keep a little bit of
more body.
Wideness, body to the wine. So in terms of Cake Francos on Saint-Georges, I would be probably looking to have fruitiness and freshness, and body would probably be less. That's what I'm thinking. Maybe some minerality that maybe we don't get from that area, but I don't see a heavy-bodied wine from Saint-Georges. I see it
more nuanced, than maybe
more nuanced, more fresh, and we'll see. It's again. So there's not too many Cake Francos on the mountain as it is now. I don't know too many. There's two or three, but I don't know too many.
And how long do we have to wait till the?
We have to wait about 3 or 4 years still.
Okay, and I come back.
Sorry.
And what's the other bottle?
Okay, the other bottle we have is Varieties, which is a Furmint. Of course, we talked about this a little bit about Furmint, and I think is a very important varietal for Hungary, as well as our mountain. And I've taken it full stride, and I believe in it. And this is a 17. This is also started the fermentation in stainless steel and then into 500-liter Hungarian oak. One thing interesting about I believe in Furmint is that it is the variety in our cellar that loves barrels the most. So we do have some nice ferments even after the 19s that are in stainless steel or other vessels, but this is the varietal that integrates the best with our Tokaj wood, I mean the Zemplén oak.
You also experiment with barrel fermentation or only stainless steel?
Both, yes. We've done barrel fermentations as well. We do have lots of barrel fermentations. This is we often start in stainless steel. We can, if we want to, we can control temperature, but in many cases we don't have to. And then we will put into wood halfway through the fermentation.
And how long do you keep it in the skin? Maybe
these not at all. We have some skin contact Furmint. We have an orange wine from 2017. Which we are going to be coming out with very soon, and that's quite interesting. It was a 30-day skin contact ferment, and it's quite interesting. We've taken it abroad, and very excited about it. I'm excited about it too. It's got little tannins to it that are quite nice.
It's much more floral, I would say, than the last one was, full of white flowers. Wow, still really nice acidity. You said it's 17, right?
17, yeah.
Still really fresh, but it really has...
18, sorry.
18. But it's really fresh. And the acidity is not so linear, I would say. It's lingering also under my tongue. So it's also in terms of style, it has a different mouthfeel.
I'm interesting from you. You tasting Tokaj wines, and this is a Szentgyörgy or a Mount Szentgyörgy.
I would say it has less body, as you may have referred to, but it has more. I don't want to repeat myself, but more salinity, I would say, and more like a crispiness, which also like grabs your mouth like little, I don't know, like crystals in your mouth.
Yeah, I agree. So I like wines that when you're eating too. So I think of wine and food often, and that clean your palate. So this is the wine too. Much of our wines from Szentgyörgy clean the palate. So you're having some food with a little bit of oils or greases and things, and even cheeses. It cleans your palate. It freshens your palate all the time.
True.
And that's what I like.
Pleasant reset for your mouth.
Yeah, it's a reset. It's a reset. Yeah, for your next bite of that food. You
And you use spontaneous fermentation, native yeast only.
All of our premium wines are spontaneous ferment.
But it's very floral. It's very different to another one. And how many residual sugar do you have? You said it's much less, or would you say it's less than in Tokaj, right? It's 1 or 2 grams.
I'm thinking this is probably about 2 grams.
In broader terms, how would you maybe distinguish, and where do you see the future of this volcanic movement, which is kind of not only getting a hype, but getting maybe a momentum these days or these years?
Well, I'm curious if you see a momentum, but I've recently, in the past, let's say 6 months, seen some movement in terms of volcanic wine. I know, particularly in the UK, I think there's an awareness of volcanic wines. I know in Canada, particularly in the Toronto market and Toronto, Ontario market, there's awareness of volcanic wines. There are more and more exhibits and exhibitions along the volcanic wine idea. So I think that it's picking up some momentum. How big it becomes is another question. It's an interesting topic because you have so many volcanic wine regions with different varietals. It can be very exciting, but you have to be careful that it's not too confusing. Because you have volcanic wines from Tenerife, or you have volcanic wines from Santorini, or you have volcanic wines from the middle of France now. There's an event happening in the middle of France. You have volcanic wines from Oregon, and it's important somehow to, and I think John Sabot is working on this to try this identifying character, the salinity that he talks about, salinity, good acidity, good kind of acidity. And as the wines get older, and that's an important point. We're tasting very young wines now, but as the wines get older, maybe the varietal character starts to disappear in terms of the initial aroma profiles, but then the terroir starts to speak, and that's more about the saltiness, the minerality, and the umami that comes from the wines, and that's as time goes on. So,
have you also been to this Go Volcanic Festival?
We were there, yes. I visited, yes. Yes.
Yeah. And what do you think of it? Do you think these events could help? Maybe.
Of course, every event is helpful. I think the awareness of volcanic wines, and I support all that movement. We are. I mean, I started in volcanic wines of Pannonia. A number of winemakers we try to market abroad. So it's not a marketing association for Hungary, because I think Hungarians pretty much understand our wine regions, but it's more for abroad. So we will be doing this. John Sabot will have an event in Berlin in, I think it's beginning of June, and so we'll be there.
We are sitting here on January the 8th or 9th. Yeah. So the second week of 2020, where would you see the Gilvesy wines maybe in the next 5 years, or at the end of this year maybe?
Well, it's very important for us. It's always been important, even from the beginning, not even just now. We reach foreign markets, because I believe that Hungary has a huge wine tradition, has very important varietals, and has a lot of really quality wines that are unrecognized. And for me, it's very important to try to put these wines on the top shelf internationally and talk about them and bring people here to look at what we're doing and enjoy them, identify with them, because identifying is part of the process of creating fans. We want fans of wine. We want the recognition that these wines, it's not just about having a wine that's good. Drinking today a 2019 wine is nice and it's beautiful, but it also should be wines that can stay in the bottle and get more beautiful with the next 10 or 15 years or 20 years, depending on that type of wine. And that's something I think that we're working on.
Just to go back, the wine, it's going into this kind of honeysuckle and really this sweetness. But the other one was, for me, was much more smoky, and also this flintiness. The Riesling transmitted it. But it's very interesting, because you said it has only a few grams of sugar, but it has it's developing a very sweet nose.
Yes.
And also in terms of soil, because you mentioned basalt, and it's in general, would you say that it's a more acidic soil than the limestone that you had in Chopak? Or
the pH is lower here than in the other vineyards in the limestone. So yes, it is. So we get slightly higher acidities here than in Balaton Chopak. Not much. It's a different type of. I say it's more the type of acidity than the total acidity. Yeah.
And if listeners maybe from other countries would like to buy your wine, where could they turn to, or how?
Well, if you're in Hungary, you can go to either the bortársaság.hu, or you can come to the cellar or contact us. So gilvesy.hu, which is the website where you'll find an email, and you can come to the cellar, and we have a vinoteca, and you can buy wines here.
And on foreign markets, do you have
foreign markets? We're in a number of foreign markets. We're in North America and 2 Canadian markets, which would be the Ontario with Nicholas Pearce wines or NP wines. We're in Quebec with Raisin. It's Rezin. We're in New York with Palinquerie. It's
Latina.
Yes, Latina. We're in London with Davies Wines. And then we're in a little bit of export to Berlin through various channels, a little bit to Poland through Lutomsky wines. Of course, because our environment in the EU to export wines to the EU is quite easy. So that's quite interesting. But Asia is big and the demand is growing and growing and growing. So I really want to open there. Maybe if it's not this year, it'll be next year.
Or how does this tax war maybe affect
the US?
Yeah,
I don't know. Tina's coming here this weekend. I'll ask her what she thinks.
Okay. Maybe I turn to her too. Okay, thank you very much. I will put all the links below in the description and also on Instagram. So thank you very much for the beautiful wines and all the best for the future.
Well, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. I hope this episode will inspire you to sip on some Gilvesy wines at the Bohém Festival on Hegymagas this August. Till then, look for the Gilvesy wines via the links in the description. In 2 weeks, you will hear from another ghost on the St. George Mountain, István Bence, the head of the biodynamic Bence Winery. But before that, I'm going to come up with the first blind tasting episode on the podcast to give you more in-depth and detailed knowledge about the wines in our glasses and maybe help you understand why different wine ghosts taste the way they taste. Subscribe to the channel to keep updated or follow the Wine Ghosts Instagram site for more information and direct contacting. Have a nice week and listen to the whispers in your glasses as often as you can.